Welcome back, kids, to here with us at Yupp Master. Well, this is our 10th foundation course, and if you remember, we've studied the chapter of transport system, and we began yesterday with platelets, and we learned about the blood clotting mechanism. We also learned about the WBCs. Do you remember which WBCs were there? Weren't there those agranulocytes, and then we did the granulocytes too? It was all depending on the cytoplasm of that WBC, right? And all the WBCs, no matter which it is, the basic function of them would be for your defense mechanism, right? Okay, so we're done with the transport fluid, the circulating fluid, that was blood. Now we're going to move on to one of the most important organs, which is of the circulatory system, and that is in fact a very vital organ for us as a human being as well, and that is none other than the human heart. So kids, let's start today. We're going to begin with today's lecture is a very fun-filled packed lecture. There's going to be first the introduction to the human heart. After that, we'll be learning only the external structure of the human heart, and also today we will be introducing to you the internal structure as well. So have a good look at the diagrams which are there, okay? And we will together try to remember the names of the different parts which are important structures of our human heart. Okay, so let's begin. Well, studying about the human heart. Before we actually go to the structures, let's see what are the dimensions, let's see what is the weight, and let's see what are the different parts of the human heart as well. Okay, so when we talk about this human heart, first of all, we know that it is a hollow organ. Naturally, we know that it has to be hollow because it has to be filled with blood, right? So it is a hollow organ. It is completely muscular. Which muscle is it there? It is called as the cardiac muscle. Which muscle? It's called as the cardiac muscle. Okay, so the whole human heart is a muscular organ, and also we see that it is found to be in the middle of the thoracic cavity. Means it is an organ which is situated between the two lungs, and because it is in the middle of the thoracic cavity, you can say that it is mediastinal in position. What did I call that as? I called it as mediastinal. Okay, so it was mediastinal in position. That is because it is lying between the two lungs. Alright, so first of all, the human heart is hollow, it is muscular, and we say that it is mediastinal. Let's continue. Now, we see here that the heart is a conical shaped organ, okay, and it has got a broad base and a narrow apex, okay. So the base region of the heart is broader and the apex region is narrow. Alright, it's a conical shaped organ. Also, if you can see, the heart is going to be slightly tilted towards the left side of your body. Now, talking about the weight of the heart is around 250 to 300 grams, okay. That is, and if you see the size of the heart, if you close your fist, then your heart is almost the size of your own closed fist. Alright, so that's the size of your heart. Then, when we see the heart, we know how important organ it is. We also know that it is protected by the ribs externally, right? But then, along with all these other protections, on the wall of the heart itself, there is a layer which is going to protect it, okay? And that layer, because it is all around the heart, okay? What is it? It is all around, and it is all around the heart, okay? So, for a structure which is all around, we can give it the name as peri. Peri means all around, and because we're talking about heart, so you can use the word cardium. So, when I'm talking about a layer that is all around the heart, I will call it as the pericardium. Alright, now this pericardium is divided into two layers, okay. Can you see these green lines that I have drawn here? There is an outer one and then there is an inner one, right? So the outer layer that's there, always outer layer is going to do the basic function of protection, and if it has to be giving protection over there, then it has to be made up of something tough. Something tough like what? Naturally, you cannot be expecting bone or cartilage over there. So what will I expect there? I will be expecting a layer which is fibrous. So that outer layer which is there, it's called as outer fibrous And which is this? This is all the pericardium. So may I call this as the outer fibrous pericardium. Okay. So that is the outer fibrous pericardium. After that, the layer that you're seeing, which is inner to it, more nearer to the heart, that is going to be called as the inner serous pericardium. Okay. So the two basic layers are the outer fibrous pericardium and then the inner serous pericardium. Now, can you just concentrate on our inner serous pericardium only? I'm only talking about this layer right now. Okay. Can you see that there is one big black line which is running through it in the middle of it? Well, what is that big black line? That big black line is nothing but it's a layer or it's a space which is called as the pericardial space. What is it called as? It's going to be called as the pericardial space. Okay, it's the pericardial space. Now, because of this space, or you can call it as the cavity, okay, because of this region in between, that inner serous pericardium has been divided into two regions. Can you see one region that is near the heart and another region which is outer to it? Okay, so now these two regions also have got names to it. The inner region, okay, and the outer region. Inner and the outer. Okay, wait. Alright, so the inner region that we see, okay, inner part, because it is near the heart, it is near the organ. Our body organs can be called as viscera. That's why the inner region can be called as the inner visceral layer. What do you call it as? It's called as the inner visceral layer. Okay, and the outer layer that we are seeing is called as the outer parietal layer. So we have got an inner visceral layer and an outer parietal layer. Both of these layers are going to be separated by that pericardial space or pericardial cavity over there. Now remember, since it is a cavity of our body, it will never remain empty. Okay, so this pericardial cavity is going to be filled with fluid. May I call that fluid as pericardial fluid? Okay, it's called as the pericardial fluid. So basically, the heart has got two layers to it. The outer layer is called as the outer fibrous pericardium. The inner layer is called as the inner serous pericardium. And the inner layer is again divided into two parts. Which are those two parts? You have an outer parietal layer and then you have an inner visceral layer. Okay, alright, let's continue now. So those were the layer or the covering of the heart. And what was that covering called as? It was all around the heart. So for all around, what was the word that we had? It was called as pericardium. Alright. Next we continue with the walls of the heart. There are basically three walls of the heart. The outer, the middle and the inner. Alright. We're going to give a common suffix to all of them. And since it is about heart, we'll give it the name as cardium. Alright. So when we're talking about the outermost layer, okay, the outermost layer over here, that is called as the epicardium. What is it called as? It's called as epicardium. Then talking about the middle layer, this part here, the thick layer that you're seeing here, that muscular layer, that's our second layer, and that layer is going to be called as the myocardium. Why is it called as myocardium? This word that you're seeing here, myo is always indicating that it is made up of muscle. Okay, so that is the muscular layer. And then talking about the inner part to it, inner to that myocardium would be an inner one, and that would be called as the endocardium. Endocardium. Okay, so the walls of the heart, how would we find the walls of the heart when you take a cross section of the heart? On cross section, we see that the outer layer is called as the epicardium, the middle layer is the myocardium, and the inner layer is known as the endocardium. Alright, so we have completed with the covering of the heart, and we've also gone ahead to describe the walls of the heart. Okay, now if I'm saying that this myocardium is muscular, then what about epicardium and endocardium? Epicardium and endocardium are behaving as the lining and the covering of the heart. Okay, so this being the covering and this one being the lining. So these are going to be made up of epithelial tissue. If you remember, epithelial tissue always are forming coverings and linings of all the hollow organs, and even our heart is a hollow organ. Alright, so these were the three walls of the heart. Do you remember those names? The epicardium, the myocardium and the endocardium. Alright, so let us begin now. Since we've basically studied the general structure of the heart, let us now come to the different parts of it, the different chambers, and which are the important blood vessels that are visible. Alright, so we begin with the external structure of the heart. Alright, talking about the external structure, first of all, we need to understand that the human heart is a four-chambered heart. Alright, so there are all four chambers and each chamber is separated from the other. No two chambers are going to be connected in such a way that blood can flow in order resulting to mixing of blood. So they are completely separated. So four chambers of the heart, there are two superior chambers and then there are two inferior chambers. Okay, so we see that the superior chambers are called as the atria. Which are the atria? Let's mark it here. The atria are these chambers over here. The superior chambers here, these are the atria, and then followed by the inferior chambers here, these are going to be called as the ventricles. So we have atria and then we have the ventricles too. Alright, now what exactly are atria? These are superior chambers, but they are also smaller, they are also thinner walled. Okay, so when we're talking about atria, we can say that these are chambers which are, not only are they superior, they are superiorly placed, okay, they are smaller, they are small, and their walls are thin. Okay, they are thin walled. Also, one important thing, these are the chambers which are going to be receiving blood, whether I'm talking about the right side chamber or whether I'm talking about the left side chamber. Now, before we go ahead, let us just discuss about which one of the heart side is the right side and which is the left side. Well, always remember, when we're doing markings or labelings in a zoology labeling, in a zoology diagram, the labeling will always be opposite. Okay, so right now this side may seem to be left side for you, but now what I'd like you to do is imagine that this is the heart of a patient who is standing right in front of you. Let's say you're a doctor and you're examining a patient who is standing right in front of you and this is his heart. Then tell me, if this is the heart of a person who is standing in front of you, which side would this side be? Wouldn't this be his right side? And this would be his left side. So, in zoology, whenever we're talking about the labelings of diagrams, be it any part or any system of the body, when we're coming to label something, it will always be considered as if you are the doctor and that is the organ which is placed in a patient in front of you. Alright, so we're going to be doing the labelings in a reverse manner. Always remember that. So this is the right side of the heart and this is the left side of the heart. Alright, now these two atria, be it the right atria or be it the left atria, they're going to be receiving blood always. Okay, from different parts of the body, they will just be a place where blood is entering into the heart. And because blood enters into the heart at those regions, these chambers are called as receiving chambers. Okay, they're known as receiving chambers. Alright, so if I am going to be defining atria, may I call these as superior, small, thin walled and receiving chambers. Okay, heading on down towards the ventricles. Now when we're talking about the ventricles, these are exactly the opposite. So if I'm saying they are opposite to atria, may I say first these are inferior. Okay, these are inferior. Then they are comparatively larger, aren't they? They are inferior, they are large, they are thick walled. Okay, they are thick walled, and these are chambers which are going to be distributing blood to different parts of the body. either towards the lungs or towards the whole body itself. Okay, so these are not receiving chambers, these are chambers which are allowing blood to go out. So may I call these as distributing chambers? Okay, these are distributing chambers. So when we're talking about the four chambers of the heart, there are two superior ones which are called as atria. There are two inferior ones which are called as ventricles. The atria are superior, small, thin-walled receiving chambers. The ventricles are inferior, large, thick-walled distributing chambers. Alright. So those were a small bit about the four chambers of the heart. Continuing that, in the external surface, we see that there are two major grooves present on the external surface of the heart. Okay, now where are these grooves located? Let's see their positioning. Alright, so first of all, we see that there is one groove which is present. This view of the heart that you are seeing, children, this is the back side of the heart that you are seeing. Also, we see that there are two grooves. The first groove is present between the two atria and the two ventricles. So since it is a groove means a small depression. Since it is a small depression present between atria and ventricles, may I call this depression as the atrioventricular groove. Where is that located? Somewhere in this region here. Okay, this region here, this is where the atrioventricular groove will be. It is between atria and ventricles. So the name given is atrioventricular groove. Okay, now the second groove that's present is present between the two ventricles, and because it is between two ventricles, this is where it is located, and may I call this next one as an interventricular one. Okay, now it can be called as an interventricular groove, and also I'd like you to know that another name for groove, or rather another name for depression, okay, another name for a depression can be called as the sulcus. So you can either call it as groove or you may call it as sulcus. But basically on the external surface of the heart, how many grooves are there? There are two grooves. One is between atria and ventricles. What do I call that? Say quickly, it's called as the atrioventricular groove. And then the next one is between the two ventricles. So we'll call it as the interventricular sulcus. Alright, now the basic point. Why are there grooves present? Okay, naturally if there is a depression, it should be for allowing some sort of structure to be settled inside it. Okay, so what exactly is that structure? Let us see there. Now you all know that even the heart, just like any other organ, even the heart is a muscular organ. Okay, so we know that the heart's function is to supply blood to the whole body. But then the heart is a muscle itself too. So doesn't that heart also require oxygen? Doesn't that heart also require nutrition? Yes or no? So the same way, like how your stomach requires food, your stomach requires nutrients, requires oxygen. Similarly, even the heart requires nutrition, requires oxygen too. So the way that we're having an artery for the stomach, we should also be having an artery for supplying the heart as well. And the arteries and the veins respectively only for the heart are going to be lying in these grooves and sulci. So let's see over here, these structures that you're seeing here. Okay, first I'll talk about this one in red, this part over here. Can you see this here? This is actually the coronary artery. What is the coronary artery? It is the artery which is going to supply oxygenated blood to the muscles of the heart and only the heart. Okay, next let's look at the other vessel. There are even the blue colored structures here, and these here are going to be called as the coronary veins. Okay, so these are the coronary veins over here. So we see that those depressions are present in the two regions, the atrioventricular groove and the interventricular sulcus. Those two depressions are present so that there could be presence of, or there could be the situation of, these coronary arteries and the coronary veins. Remember, like how you have, if I ask you what would be the name of the artery which is supplying the stomach, can I call it as the gastric artery? What about an artery which is supplying the kidney? May I call it as the renal artery? Well, if I'm talking about an artery which is supplying the heart, we can give it the name of coronary. So next time you hear coronary, you know that you are talking about the heart. Alright. So in these depressions, there is situation of the coronary arteries and the coronary veins. Also, I'd like you to see all these coronary veins. Can you see how the veins are joining together? Can you see that blue line that I'm trying to draw over there? I'll draw it in green. Well, these coronary veins, can you see how they're coming together? Okay, all the veins are coming together, and can you see how they have managed to form a big structure over here? It looks slightly inflamed, slightly swollen up, and that structure is going to be called as the coronary sinus. So, how exactly is this coronary sinus formed? It is formed by all the coronary veins come together to form the coronary sinus. Okay, so all the coronary veins are joining together, they're forming the coronary sinus. And always remember one more thing, this coronary sinus is carrying which blood? It's carrying deoxygenated blood. And where is that sinus going to open? Inside the heart itself. Do you remember? Oxygenated and deoxygenated blood is entering into the heart. So even this sinus is going to open inside the heart. Which chamber will it go into? It will enter into the right atrium. Okay, it will enter into the right atrium because in the right atrium, the deoxygenated parts or deoxygenated blood of the whole body enters into that region. Okay, so we're done with the two grooves, we're done with the coronary arteries, the coronary veins, and we also are done with the coronary sinus. Alright, now talking about the important blood vessels which are seen in the external structure of the heart, let us see which those are. Okay, first of all, the very first vessel that you might be able to put your eyes on is this one over here. Okay, this vessel here is a vessel which is going to be carrying deoxygenated blood. Can you see how it's blue colored? Okay, so it is carrying deoxygenated blood. From where? From the structures which are located above the heart. Okay, if the structure is above the heart, any structures above the heart, I can talk about all the structures in your neck, in your head region, all of the deoxygenated blood from those regions are going to be carried towards the heart. And who is carrying it? It is this blood vessel. Okay, what is this blood vessel called as? Since it is a major vein, a large vein, large veins in our body are called as the vena cava. What are they called as? Large veins are called as vena cava. Okay, and this is the vena cava which is on the top. So, can I call this vena cava as the superior vena cava? Okay, then along with the superior vena cava, from below over here, can you see there is another vena cava which we can call as the inferior one. So, that will be the inferior vena cava. So, vena cavas are two. What are they basically doing? They are the ones which are going to be bringing in the deoxygenated blood from the body to the heart. Okay, all structures above the heart, deoxygenated blood is being brought by the superior vena cava. All structures below the heart, their deoxygenated blood is being brought to the heart by the inferior vena cava. Okay, so these were the two vena cavas. Let's see two other most important structures which can be seen here. Okay, now look at this vessel here. I'll draw it with green. Look at this over here. Can you see that here, what I'm highlighting? This structure here is a structure which is going to be carrying the deoxygenated blood. Now remember, through these structures deoxygenated blood entered. Where did it enter? It entered into this chamber which we called as the right atrium, didn't it? Now from right atrium, it is still deoxygenated. That blood is going to pass into the right ventricle. So now this right ventricle is filled actually with all that deoxygenated blood. Okay, now where does that deoxygenated blood have to go? Doesn't it have to be taken to the lungs? Okay, so in order to take it to the lungs, all the deoxygenated blood over here is going to be pushed out through this vessel. And what is this vessel going to be called as? This vessel is called as the pulmonary trunk. Okay, what is it called as? It's called as the pulmonary trunk. And this pulmonary trunk is going to be dividing. Can you see how that trunk is dividing into two arteries? Okay, so this pulmonary trunk is dividing in one part here and into another part here, which you can see at this side. Okay, so those two are just divisions of the trunk, and we can call those divisions as the pulmonary arteries. Okay, so basically those pulmonary trunk are going to be dividing into pulmonary arteries, and where are they going to be taking all that blood? To the lungs. For what? For oxygenation. Okay, now after this pulmonary trunk, okay, so we're done with two important vessels. Okay, two vena cavas and one pulmonary trunk. After that, can you see one very big artery here? Okay, it's red in color. It is in fact the biggest artery in your body. And what is this biggest artery called as? It is called as the aorta. Okay, it is called as the aorta. So one more important vessel that we have in our heart external surface is the aorta. All right, so this means that there are four important blood vessels which we are able to see from the external surface of the heart. One is or rather two vena cavas, the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. Then we have the pulmonary trunk, and then we have the aorta. The aorta may also be called as the systemic. Okay, it may also be called as the systemic aorta. So basically there are four blood vessels. All right, don't forget that. All right, so that was all about the external structure of the heart. I hope you remember those points. Okay, which were all those points? First of all, we learned that there was a pericardium surrounding the heart. Then we also saw that the heart was divided into three layers. Okay, three walls of the heart: the epicardium, the myocardium, and then the endocardium. All right, then we saw the weight of the heart. How much was it? Wasn't it around 250 to 300 grams, right? Then we also continued with the external structure. In the external structure, if you remember, we said that there were four chambers, and there were two superior chambers which were called as, do you remember those names? Those two superior chambers were called as the atria. Okay, and the inferior chambers were called as the ventricles. So you have the two atria on top and the two ventricles below it. Okay, now after that we saw the presence of two grooves present on the external surface. Do you remember those two grooves? There were two names to it, if you remember. First was called as the atrioventricular groove, and the second one between the two ventricles, so we called it as interventricular. Okay, interventricular sulcus. Call it as interventricular sulcus. So these were the two grooves present. Why were there grooves present there? Do you remember that? Grooves were present so that they can accommodate the blood vessels which are restrained only to supplying the heart. Which were those called as? Anyone remember those names? They were called as the coronaries. Coronary artery and coronary vein. Alright, so there was coronary artery and coronary veins over there. Alright, do you remember coronary veins? They joined together, and what did they form? They formed a structure which we called as the coronary sinus. So basically this whole coronary arteries, coronary veins, these are nothing but the blood supply to the heart itself. Okay, so that was what we studied in the external structure of the heart. We also saw the presence of four important blood vessels over there. Which were they? Over here, here is the superior vena cava. Then that was followed by the inferior vena cava. Then this over here, this was the pulmonary trunk. Okay, for carrying deoxygenated blood to the lungs. And then this over here was the aorta. These were the 4 important blood vessels that we had seen in the external surface of the heart. So all these pointers which we just discussed right now, 1, 2, 3 and 4, are the important pointers when we are going to be discussing about the external surface of the heart. Alright, now let us begin, or let's just start with the internal structure of the heart. Okay, we will continue a major part of this tomorrow. Let's just give it a small slight briefing to it. Okay, let's just begin it. Now, talking about the internal structure of heart, to view it from inside, the first thing that we need to do is we need to take a cross section. So this figure that you're seeing on your screen right now is indicating a cross section of the heart. Okay, so can you see how clearly you are able to see the chambers? This is the atrium. Which atrium is this? Remember, this is the right side. So this is the right atrium. This on the other side is also an atrium, and that is going to be called as the left atrium. Okay. Below it, this part here, lower chamber, that will be the right ventricle, and this region here, lower chamber, that will be the left ventricle. Okay. Now, understand one more thing, that when we're talking about the internal structure of heart, we're going to be dividing this whole answer, this whole topic into 3 regions. Okay. The first region we will be dealing with the superior chambers. So this whole answer we're going to be starting by first talking about the atria. Okay, so this is going to begin with atria. And when we're talking about atria, we're going to first study about the right side. Okay, then we will move on towards the left side. Okay, then after the atria part is over, before heading on towards for the ventricles, we will study some structures which are between the atria and the ventricles. Okay, that apparatus which is present between atria and ventricles, that apparatus is going to be called as the atrioventricular apparatus. So I'll call after atria. Our first point will be about atria, and our second point will be the AV apparatus, also called as the atrioventricular apparatus. Okay, so you have the atria. The second point we will study will be about the atrioventricular apparatus, and finally we will come to the lower chambers and we will learn about the ventricles. And even in the ventricles, when we're studying that, we're going to be studying one after the other. First, in the ventricles, we will be learning about the right ventricle, and then we will head on towards the left ventricle. Okay, so basically I gave you an outlook of when we are studying this important subject of internal structure of heart. It's going to be divided into 3 parts to it. The first part will be only about the atria. Second part will be the part between the atria and ventricles. We call that as the atrioventricular apparatus. And then the third region will be about the ventricles. Okay, the right and the left side of the ventricles. Alright, so shall we begin? Yes, we'll just begin with a small intro to only the atria part. We'll continue the rest in tomorrow's lecture. First of all, understand, when we're talking about the internal structure, do you remember I told you that all the 4 chambers are distinctly separated from each other? So only even when we're talking about the atria, remember right now we're only talking about the atria. So even when we're only talking about atria, okay, we see that the atria, whether it is on this side, remember this side is the right side and this side is the left side. These are separated by a septum. What is septum? Septum is just another word for separation. Okay, and this is a separation between the 2 atria. Because it is between 2 atria, it is called as interatrial septum. If I am talking about a structure which is inside the atria, I would have called it as intra. Okay, but I am talking about between 2 atria. That's why I use the word inter. So interatrial septum is a septum which would be situated somewhere in this region, okay, which is between the 2 atria, making sure that blood does not go from one chamber to another chamber. Okay, so that was interatrial septum. Next, when we're talking about only the right atrium, this right atrium, okay, which atrium am I talking about? Which chamber? I'm talking about this chamber over here. Okay, this chamber over here, when we're talking about it, it is going to be receiving which blood? It will be receiving the deoxygenated blood, and deoxygenated blood can enter into this chamber. Which chamber? The right atrium. Deoxygenated blood is going to enter from three regions. Now, I would like you to remember which are these three regions that I am talking about. Imagine, when I am talking about all the structures above the heart, who is going to bring the deoxygenated blood from them? Remember this structure here? And which was this? This was called as the superior vena cava. But then, what about from the structures which are below the heart? Who is going to bring the deoxygenated blood from there? Can it be called here as the inferior vena cava? So, you have the superior vena cava and then you have the inferior vena cava. Alright, that is going to be bringing deoxygenated blood from all the different parts of the body, whether it is superior or whether it is inferior. But then we forgot one organ. What about the heart itself? Even the heart muscle layers, okay, even that is going to be provided with blood. Carbon dioxide will be formed. All of that. What about that? Look at these here. Aren't these all muscles? Won't these muscles for contraction require oxygen? Won't they require nutrition? So if they are being used, okay, or if oxygen is being used, then carbon dioxide will naturally be produced. So remember the structures of coronary arteries and coronary veins. The coronary veins are the ones which are going to be carrying that deoxygenated blood from the heart, okay, from the muscles of the heart, and where will it pour it? Into the right atrium. But how does it do that? Do you remember the coronary sinus? What was that? It was a structure which is formed by joining of all the coronary veins. So all these coronary veins join together to form the coronary sinus, okay, and it opens up into the right atrium. So we see that the right atrium is going to be supplied with which blood? Supplied with deoxygenated blood. But it is supplied with deoxygenated blood from three regions. Which are those three regions? The first, deoxygenated blood is being brought initially by superior vena cava. Okay. Second, deoxygenated blood will also be brought by the inferior vena cava. Alright. Structures above the heart, structures below the heart, and what about the heart itself? Can I say this as the coronary sinus? Okay. So just a brief of this. These are structures above heart. Okay. This is for structures below heart, and this is of the heart itself. Okay. So this was all about the right atrium. All right. Now let's continue. When we're talking about the external structure of the heart, okay, we see also here that there is a fetal structure in the internal part of it. Okay, in the internal structure we see between the two atrium. If you remember that between the two atriums there is an interatrial septum. Okay, now when we're talking about fetal, what do I mean by fetal? I mean before birth. Okay, before birth we see that the fetal lungs, okay, fetus means the baby inside the mother's womb. All right, the fetal lungs are completely not working. Okay, do you remember? Just listen to what I'm saying very carefully. Fetal lungs are completely non-functional. They are completely non-functional. So this means that the baby is completely dependent on the mother for its oxygen. Alright. So fetal lungs are non-functional. Now let's see that in the heart of a small fetus, we see that there is a actual an opening which is present between the two atria. So can you see this region over here? Okay, I'll draw it with a red color. Can you see this region over here? In the heart of a fetus, that region is completely open. It is like a small cavity over there, and the scientific name for cavity would be called as a foramen. So because this is oval in shape, this is also can be called as the foramen ovale. And what is this foramen ovale going to be doing? It is, since it is a structure, since it is a opening between the two atria, we see that it is going to allow blood to flow from this right atrium to the left atrium. Okay, that is only during fetal structures. Remember that, only in fetus. Okay, why is this happening? Just remember, just try to think about it. Rather, if there is blood over here, and if at all blood goes down here, if at all there is no opening here, okay, there's no opening, and if blood in the fetus, if the blood goes down here, then from here, where would the blood go? From this region, naturally, that blood has to go over here, right? It has to go through that pulmonary trunk, and where would the pulmonary trunk take it? It would take it to the lungs. But then I told you that the fetal lungs are non-functional. So does it actually make sense to take all that deoxygenated blood to the lungs? No, it doesn't. That is why in the fetal structures, we see that there is a structure which is a hole present between the two atria, and it allows blood to go from the right atrium directly to the left atrium, so that it can be carried to the different parts of the body. Alright. So that apparatus, which is a hole present in the fetal structure, is called as the foramen ovale. Alright. But then understand, as you study ahead, we will learn that this foramen ovale at the time of birth, that is going to be sealed up. Okay, so it will be sealed so that after birth there is no mixing of blood at all. Why? Immediately when that child is born, do you remember how in hospitals everybody is waiting for that baby to cry? That's probably the only time where your mom would like you crying, right? So basically that crying is done just because we know that as the baby will cry, just imagine when you're crying, don't you have a tendency to breathe in even more? So even that baby, when the baby is just born, because it has to take in air into the lungs and the lungs have to inflate, the more it will cry, the louder it will cry, the more air will be able to enter inside the lungs and the lungs will get inflated. Once the lungs are inflated, that is when the baby will be able to take its own oxygen from the atmosphere. Until then, all those 9 months of pregnancy, the baby was completely dependent on the mother for its oxygen because the baby's lungs were not functioning at all. So immediately after birth, this foramen ovale, this hole which is present in the heart of a baby, is going to be completely sealed. Now, you might have heard about some children being born with holes in their heart. What is that hole? This foramen ovale, if at all, it is not completely covered at the time of birth as it should be, and if at all that covering is not being done in a proper manner, that is what results in the hole being left in the heart. Alright, and that would be immediately taken to surgery because we cannot afford to have mixing of blood in the 4 chambers. Alright, so this was all about the important structures that we have started with in the internal structure of the heart. Okay, we will be continuing with the other structures of the internal structure in tomorrow's lecture. So today's lecture was all about the basic general characteristics of our human heart, right? We learnt about the 4 chambers. We learnt about the structure all around the heart. What did I call it as? Didn't we call it as a pericardium? Then we went on towards the weight of the heart. We went on towards the 3 layers of the wall of the heart, the epicardium, the myocardium, the endocardium, correct? Then we continued with the external structure of the heart. And in external structure, we learned that there were 4 chambers, 2 superior atria, 2 inferior ventricles, right? The smaller ones were the atria, ventricles were the larger ones, the ones with the thicker walls. We also saw that on the external structure of the heart, there were 4 important blood vessels: the superior vena cava, the inferior vena cava, the pulmonary trunk, and the systemic aorta. We also saw that there were 2 grooves present. Do you remember the names of those grooves? Interventricular groove and the atrioventricular groove, right? These were present for the situation of the arteries. Which arteries? The coronary arteries and the coronary veins. The veins joined together to form a coronary sinus. Alright. Then we moved on towards the internal structure. Always remember one thing in today's lecture. Internal structure of the heart is going to be studied in 3 topics. First, we will be talking about the atrium. We go on from the right atrium to the left atrium. Then after atrium, our next topic will be atrioventricular apparatus, and that atrioventricular apparatus will be dealing with some valves present there. Okay. And third, after that apparatus, we will be learning about the ventricles, and even in the ventricles we will go from right side ventricle towards the left side ventricle. Okay, so this is how we're going to be covering the whole internal structure of heart, of which today we covered only about the right atrium. So in tomorrow's lecture, the first thing we begin with is we'll just quickly recap the right atrium, and we will start with the left atrium itself. Okay, and then we will complete the internal structure of heart. So kids, remember to note down points of this. Okay, and also now on our platform we have a 24/7 live ask a doubt session where all your doubts of zoology especially would be answered personally. Zoology and rather your whole biology would be answered personally by me. And also if you have a doubt in any of your other questions or any of your other subjects, our other star teachers would also be helping you out with those there. So do download the app, do go to the live doubt session and do ask your doubts. I would immediately answer them. All right, so hope you're staying home, taking care of yourselves in this lockdown. Take care, keep studying, and come tomorrow we'll study with the internal structure of the heart. Till then,